Last week, Rolling Stone's cover story was about the K-pop group BTS. I feel like I don't need to explain who they are since they've been the biggest K-pop act for a few years now, and their online presence is insane. I mean, look at their YouTube views, their likes and retweets on Twitter, and their endless list of awards. So anyways, here's BTS on the cover of Rolling Stone, and they did an individual interview with each of the members. As I was reading member RM's Rolling Stone interview, one of his responses to a question sparked some curiosity within me. The interviewer had said, "I know that many fans don't see BTS as part of K-pop, and you yourselves have said that BTS is the genre. How do you see it?" To which RM responded by bringing up interesting points. Some so-called K-pop groups have only foreigners, but they do the K-pop thing. Somebody could say that K-pop is for Koreans who sing a Korean song. But what about Dynamite? We sing the song in English, but we're all Koreans, so somebody may say it's a K-pop song. At the end, he says this debate is not too important for him or his members of BTS, and I admire how intent they are on walking their own path, that they're not trying to fit into one box or the other. But I do care about this question, because nowadays there are so many exceptions to the traditional definition of K-pop that it feels like the K in K-pop is losing its meaning. K-pop stands for Korean popular music, and it's usually thought of as having the following traits. It's sung either fully or at least mostly in Korean with a little bit of English mixed into it, hence the Korean in K-pop. Generally, it's thought to be more experimental than American pop. A lot of K-pop songs will include components from multiple genres. Usually Western pop and hip-hop will be present, but it's also common to see other genres like rock, R&B, EDM, and trap all in one track. The members of the group or the solo artist will be of East Asian heritage. In the past, it was mostly Koreans in the K-pop scene, but nowadays, with K-pop companies really trying to break into the international market, it's pretty common for groups to have several members that are not Korean, but the norm is still to be East Asian. However, I'm going to talk about 4 K-pop acts that bring exceptions to this conventional view of K-pop: BTS, Blackpink, WayV, and EXP Edition. Of course, there are many other groups that may challenge these features I talked about, but I'm just going to focus on a few acts for the purpose of being able to go into depth about specific examples. Also, I know amazing dance choreographies are often associated with K-pop, but a lot of non-K-pop artists also have great choreos, and there are a lot of K-pop songs that don't have choreos, oftentimes the side tracks on a K-pop album. So I don't think dance choreography is something necessary in order for something to be considered K-pop. Alright, first, BTS. I'm gonna sound like a Wikipedia page for a second, but BTS is a 7-member K-pop boy group with all of the members being of Korean background, so they have 0 international members. RM can speak English well, but he learned it as a second language later on, so he's not actually American or anything. Last year in August 2020, they released their first all-English song called Dynamite. Let's go! And last week, they released another all-English song called Butter. Now, if you listen to both songs, you'll find that they sound pretty Western. The members said themselves that Dynamite is just a plain pop song, and it did do pretty well on American radio. It didn't really have experimental aspects that K-pop tends to have. I think Butter is a little less mainstream sounding because it does borrow elements of funk in its verses, but it's still something that I can imagine hearing on American radio. Quick side note, when I call something mainstream or radio friendly, I don't mean it in a degrading way at all. It's just a way of describing something that is sonically popular among the general public. So Dynamite and Butter are both all English songs with an American pop feel, but people still put them under the K-pop category. Is it because the BTS members are all Korean and they don't use English as their main form of communication? Another example that I think is interesting to consider is some of BTS's collaborations with American artists. Their song Boy With Love featuring Halsey is sung predominantly in Korean, and even Halsey sings a few lines in Korean, so it seems to make sense that Boy With Love would be called K-pop. However, on Halsey's Manic album, she has a track called Suga's Interlude, which is a track that features the BTS member Suga, rapping entirely in Korean. In fact, his parts are longer than Halsey's, so the track actually has the same Korean to English ratio as a lot of K-pop songs nowadays. But Suga's Interlude is called a dream alt-pop track. No K. It's not like Boy With Love was super sonically different from American pop. In fact, it sounds like it would fit perfectly on American radio. So if both Suga's Interlude and Boy With Love are predominantly in Korean and they both match Western genres of music, why is one K-pop and the other not? Blackpink is the only other K-pop artist I've heard being played on North American radio apart from BTS, so I think they're a good group to continue our analysis with. I've heard their song Ice Cream featuring Selena Gomez and Sour Candy with Lady Gaga maybe once on the radio. But unlike BTS, 3/4 of Blackpink did not grow up in Korea. Lisa was born and raised in Thailand, Jennie was born in Korea but she grew up in New Zealand, and Rosé was born in New Zealand and grew up in Australia. They have yet to release an all-English song, but a lot of their songs do have a lot of English in them, to the point where there's more English than Korean. So when they sing predominantly English songs, do these escape the K-pop label? Not quite. When they are collaborating with Western artists, yes, people seem to drop the K. But when it's just Blackpink on the track, then people start to say, oh no, that's K-pop. It's a similar phenomenon to how there are songs like Dynamite where it's all English in a traditional American pop style, but people will say, oh yeah, I listen to K-pop, I have that song Dynamite in my playlist. It feels almost like because these artists look East Asian, and not even specifically Korean because there are many that aren't actually Korean, and the West can't really tell the difference, they just tend to clump East Asianness into one big blob. There's a sense of exoticness that's been associated with East Asians for so long, and it seems to only be covered up if there's a Western artist that's taking the lead or having an equal part in the track. Remember, they can't just be featured for a few lines like Boy With Love featuring Halsey, or else it'll just be stuck in the K-pop category. The Western artist needs to have a leg up, such as Blackpink's Ice Cream, where Selena Gomez has equal attention, or Sour Candy, where Lady Gaga has more lines than Blackpink. Which is why, even though Halsey sings less than Suga in Suga's Interlude, it's ultimately her song on her album, so it's not K-pop. Because its Western artist validates how well the song fits into our Western standards, even though it doesn't actually have anything to do with how the song sounds. And in the same way, Ice Cream and Sour Candy are not considered K-pop. But if these songs did not have a Western feature, would the genre of these songs be perceived differently? I want to move on and talk about another K-pop group called WayV. Actually, that's what the whole debate is about. Are WayV K-pop or C-pop? There are a lot of forum discussions about this because WayV is a subunit of the K-pop group NCT, and they're managed by a Korean entertainment company called SM. Now, WayV was intended to be a Chinese subunit, so all of their songs are sung in Mandarin. And all of their members are of Chinese ethnicity, except for Ten, who is Thai, Lucas, who is half Thai, half Chinese, and yangyang, who is Taiwanese, but Mandarin is still the official language of Taiwan. Main point is, none of them are Korean, and none of their songs are in Korean. But people still say that WayV sounds like K-pop, not like C-pop, and they largely promote in Korea anyways. People also say that WayV is managed by a Korean entertainment company, so that contributes to them being K-pop rather than C-pop. And people also point out many differences between the K-pop versus C-pop industries. The differences between the C-pop versus K-pop industries boil down to three main things. 1. K-pop training is longer and more vigorous. K-pop groups usually sign contracts for years, whereas C-pop groups usually only stay together for 1 to 2 years. 2. C-pop fan culture is a lot more solo-based, so fans will support one member out of a group, and each individual member will take on individual promotion and projects. Whereas in K-pop, a lot of fan support comes from really good band chemistry. The group is emphasized as a unit. There are many frustrated WayV fans who wanted SM to promote the members more individually to match the C-pop industry so that they could actually do well as a Chinese subunit, but that hasn't really happened. The process of performing on Korean music shows is also something that WayV takes part in, which again is not something that C-pop groups do. But as compelling as this industry's difference argument is, I don't think K-pop ultimately is defined by company management. K-pop should be treated as a music genre, not a business model, at least in my opinion. So I'm not really going to factor industry or management style into my analysis. If we're only looking at the musical aspect of things, then we should treat K-pop as a type of sound, the way rock, R&B, classical, and jazz all have distinctive features that make them the genre they are. But can we completely neglect the role Korean language plays in K-pop? I mean, it's called Korean popular music after all, isn't it? Well, think about it this way. Latin pop is a genre that originated from Spanish, Portuguese, and other Latin Creole-speaking artists. Nowadays, though, more and more Western artists are adopting the sound of Latin pop in English songs. And I think K-pop is like this too. The language is not what defines whether something is K-pop or not. It's the sound. People who prefer K-pop to Western pop don't just listen to K-pop because it's Western pop but just in Korean language. No, it's a sound of its own. That's why you can have English language K-pop songs, but also, I argue, Korean Western pop songs. This is a good segue into talking about our last group, EXP Edition, the first all non-Korean K-pop group. They were the creation of a Korean master's student, Bora Kim, who was studying at Columbia University. And her thesis project was to ask what the limits of K-pop are by creating a non-Korean K-pop group. EXP Edition were not formed in what people would call an authentic K-pop process. They trained themselves. They had to look for dance studios and Korean language teachers themselves. They didn't have the companies or years of professional training that other K-pop trainees do have. They finally debuted in 2017, but the backlash that they received, at least from international fans, was brutal. Everyone was calling them cringe wannabes or accusing them of cultural appropriation. But to this, Bora Kim responded in a BBC interview and said that it was an unfair accusation because K-pop borrows heavily from other cultures itself. There is no single origin or traditional Koreanness to K-pop. It's such a mixture of everything. It has influences from US and Japan. And here's the thing. With our previous examples, it seems like we believe that K-pop is a genre based on its unique sound, not on whether people speak Korean or whether the members themselves are Korean. Blackpink is pretty close to being all non-Korean. WayV is literally all non-Korean. And they don't even sing in Korean, whereas EXP Edition does. When we compare the insane backlash that EXP Edition got to all the support that WayV still gets, I get a feeling that EXP Edition is getting unique hate for their project because they don't look East Asian. I touched on this briefly earlier, but the West is not so great at differentiating between East Asian cultures. Chinese, Korean, Thai, Same difference. The West just lumps them all in the same box. That's why WayV can still be debated as a K-pop group, because international fans don't think the difference matters, whereas EXP Edition lacks those East Asian features, and so they can't get that same pass. And I think that's harmful for the K-pop groups, for K-pop fans, and for the East Asian community as a whole. If you accept Lisa and Ten, who are Thai, as proper K-pop stars, but simultaneously cringe at other ethnicities for wanting to try out the K-pop genre, you're implying that anyone who is East Asian can pass as Korean, which is just not true. East Asian culture cannot be simplified like that. It also reinforces the exotic nature of East Asianness by feeling as though because it's an East Asian looking person who is singing the songs you're listening to, it makes the song not mainstream and cultured. If you want BTS's all-English pop songs to be treated equally with other Western pop songs and not be labeled K-pop just because they look East Asian, then you also need to accept foreigners who don't look East Asian but want to make a K-pop song. If you only validate East Asianness but then at the same time get angry at Asian fetishization, you're contradicting yourself. At this point, you clearly have an image of what people are allowed to look like in the industry, and I don't think that's right. Even if you find EXP Edition to be unbearable, just think about whether you would reject WayV to the same degree, and why that is. K-pop is evolving and pushing language barriers more than ever. And so, when the K starts to lose its original meaning, maybe it's something to be happy about. If you disagree with me, please let me know why. I'm not a devoted fan of any of the groups I mentioned except for BTS, so if I got some information wrong or am lacking context, by all means correct me. Thank you so much for watching, let's keep talking, and I hope to hear from you soon. Bye!